Hi, Neil.
Hello.
You all right?
Very well. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Wait, Sophie.
Hi.
Hello.
Afternoon.
How you guys keeping?
Good.
Too bad. You?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Northern Ireland slowly moving open a little bit more, which is great news for the bank holiday weekend and so on. So, no, we're pretty good, thanks. Pretty good. Julia, you've had a haircut.
Yeah, I made sure it was a good one because I don't know if I'll get another one before the next lockdown.
Can you imagine?
I can't go through that again.
No, likewise, absolutely. I'm with you that 100%. All right. So welcome everybody. This is another ICCM Masterclass. These sessions are always the most popular. We get great attendees, we get great questions, great interaction, and all the rest of it. So you've got the use of Julie, Sophia, and Matt from the ICCM, and they're talking all. It's a Q&A session, so. Like the promotion, anything from unauthorised scattering of ashes to double burials and inspection of cremation paperwork and a whole lot more. Whatever you guys want to put to these good folk, then that's what they're here for. So get your thinking caps on. I think we've got a few polls, but we're looking forward to it. And I guess at this point, over to you good folks. Oh, Julie.
Just realised I'm not. You think after a year of doing these, I'd be familiar with how it works now, wouldn't you? But thanks, Neil. We have pre-prepared some questions. Did you manage to put those onto polls for us?
We do indeed. Yes. So we've got the polls ready. Do you want me to start with the first one?
I think Sophia's going to introduce the first one. So if you won't mind bringing that up, Neil, that'd be great. Thank you.
Problem. So I'm going to launch that, and Sophia, all yours.
Thanks, Neil. Okay, question number 1. If 2 coffins are to be buried in a grave at the same time, does 6 inches of soil have to be left on top of the first coffin before the second one is buried? So yes, no, or not sure, if you'd like to vote.
I've got a sneaking suspicion this is a trick question.
Never. We wouldn't do that to our members.
Toby wants to vote.
We should still organise that drum roll for the next one.
I tried that with the countdown music last time, and but all of a sudden YouTube played an advert for me, so it kind of ruined it. All right. So how many people we got voted? All right, that's probably everybody bar us. So we're at 90% there. So I'm going to end this poll. And do you want me to share those results?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, there we are.
Interesting. 58% say yes, 23% say no, and 20% say they're not sure. That's an interesting division. So the actual answer is no. The local authority cemetery's order, although it says it requires 6 inches of soil between each coffin, it does say the 6 inches only applies where a coffin has been interred on a previous occasion. So when 2 coffins are buried at the same funeral, this is not deemed as a previous occasion, and therefore the requirement for 6 inches of soil between each coffin is not required. We always say it's unfair to make the family wait whilst the first one's being backfilled for the second one to be lowered. But what we do suggest is that you put some kind of wooden blocks at the bottom of the first coffin or on the base of the second coffin so that they can get to spread the weight and ensure that the second coffin is not sitting directly onto the first coffin.
Very good.
Might be just worth saying there as well for the people that said yes that are now panicking they're doing it wrong. I used to do that. I used to make them wait.
Okay.
I used to take people to the side and let them wait for a while. And now that I know you don't have to, do it. So don't feel silly.
I think that's a really good point, Matt. Actually, it's very important that don't, we're not doing this to make you feel bad in any way, shape or form. So, you know, if you are doing that, fine, it's not illegal as such. However, it just might be easier for you knowing that you don't have to do that and that there is an alternative. So please don't think we're trying to trip you up. We're not. We are literally just trying to share experiences and information. So yeah, I think point well made, Matt.
Yep.
Okay.
We got
We
questions.
can move
Ready
this.
for the next one, Neil?
No worries. Okay, so on to number 2, and all yours, sir.
Okay, so this comes up quite regularly. So if you notice that ashes have been scattered on a grave without authorisation, can you recover them without seeking an exhumation licence or a faculty? So yes, no, or not sure again. We do need some music here.
You volunteering, Matt?
That's well behind me now.
Oh, you could do a bit of a rendition, Matt. That'd be nice.
If anyone wants to buy a CD, I've got a garage full.
No. Okay, that's again, that's probably at the limit we've got here. So we'll close that off and get those shared. Here we are.
Okay, so most people saying yes again, then closely followed by no. So the answer is yes, yes, you can. So you can remove them because they're not buried, is what it really boils down to. And by buried, when people are wondering what that means, it's a definable mass. So we're not going down that road. They've been scattered on top of the grave. But the thing to maybe consider is, does the grave owner even know they're there? I hear a lot of people when they call ringing, wondering what to do next. They immediately want to scoop all the ashes up and take them away as quick as they can. But I think we've got always a bit nervous of saying moral and ethical stance, but you do have to consider it because it's going to upset someone potentially. And if the grave owner doesn't even know they're there, they should be given the first option to decide what they want to do next. So you've got plenty of options. You could retrospectively, record them in your register. You could. There's another big one where people think if they're scattered on top of the graves, then closed, which isn't entirely true. So you could, through discussions with the grave owner, decide that the next time you open the grave, you take the turf off, put it to one side, and then when you backfill after the next burial, that 6 inches of soil we've just been talking about, a portion of that could be made up with that turf that you then rebury. So you just reflect that in your register that they've moved. So it's pretty nice and simple, that one, but yeah, it confuses many. But yeah, you can move them. That's the main thing.
Ooh. Julie, you're on mute.
I turned myself onto mute because my cat is purring so loudly that I thought it would be drowning out Matt's comments there. So I'll try and shut him up.
Oh, it's all good. Okay. Are you ready for number 3?
Yes, please.
Let's do it.
Okay, so if you have an application for a forthcoming burial in a grave in your cemetery and the family are not sure who the registered grave owner is, can you release that information to the funeral director? So can you tell the funeral director who the registered owner of the grave is ahead of a burial? So answers again, quite simple. 1, yes, 2, no, 3, don't know. If you can place your votes now, please.
That was very Chris Tarrant there, Julie. Very good.
New career ahead.
Yeah. It's who is it now? Jeremy Clarkson. He does it.
Really?
Yeah. Who got? He's I know. It's a character. Where are we? That's probably us. Here we go. There's your results.
Okay, so 40% of people say yes, you can tell the funeral director the information about who is the grave owner. 53% of people say no, you can't give that information out, and 7% are not sure. So that's quite interesting. Not a huge split between yes and no. Our advice is that actually you can give that information to the funeral director. Now, there's certain things at play here. We've got the Local Authority Cemeteries Order 1977, LACO, our favourite bit of legislation. And you've also got data protection, so the GDPR. And the two kind of don't really marry. LACO says that you have to keep registers of certain information and that you have to make those registers available to the public. And also that the authority can actually charge to make a search and make copies of the information in those registers. So on the one hand, you've got very public information. The public have the right to inspect your registers. On the other hand, we're not supposed to give out information about living people under the GDPR. So you've got a bit of a conflict there. The Ministry of Justice are of the opinion that LACO takes precedence and that actually it is okay to give out the information. We ran this past our company solicitor, and his view is also that the information can be given to the funeral director because it's in the public interest or in the interest of the family to have that information to allow the burial to go ahead. So there's a good reason for releasing that information. Therefore, you can release that information. However, our solicitor Charles does advise that some wording is given around that. So when you send the information, you should also put some information on there stating why you're releasing the information and basically saying that it shouldn't go anywhere else. So what we can do is we can put this into, can we put this in the chat function, Neil? Or can we email it to people afterwards? That's probably easier.
We can do that for you, yeah. No
Yeah. We'll email the wording that Charles suggested that you use if you do give out the information about grave owners, and then that should cover you with any potential issue coming back at you from GDPR.
Yes,
but bear in mind that people have the right to inspect your registers anyway, so it's really difficult to not give out the information.
That's right. And a more general point on the GDPR is, as I'm sure all of you good folks will know, there's a lot of grey in the GDPR. It's not all black and white, and there is, there is a judgment call going to have to be made, depending on not just that situation, but on many situations. And there are things like, legitimate interest, and public interest and so on, depending on what type of data and situation you're talking about. So I don't know if you've been on the site, but if you go to the ICO website, the Information Commissioner's website, so it's just ICO.org, I think, there's all the legislation on there, but then there's a lot of kind of helpful interpretation and like a checklist for each section. So consider this to help you with that decision making if you don't have access to a solicitor. So it's ICO.org, I'm sure, but it's the ICO, you'll find it on Google. Anyway, that's that. Should we do number 4? Perfect.
So just before we move on, there's just a couple of comments that have come up in the chat that I think are relevant to what we've just spoke about. I don't know if you want to.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for Nick on the double burial piece, and then Fiona Porter would advise the name of the title holder, but would not divulge the address, and would ask the FD to confirm with the family that the person that the address is to check if correct with the correct person. And then Victoria Curie, was that just to FDs or anyone?
So I'm just reading that. Certainly to an FD wouldn't be an issue, and you could make a judgment as to whether you release it to anyone depending on what the outcome is going to be. As I say, they can come and look at the registers anyway. So if you think, if it's for a good reason, you could release that information. I think what I've tended to do in the past is rather than release the information, it's offered to write to that person yourself as the burial authority, because you can hold that information, to sort of make that approach rather than giving out the details to somebody else. So I think, you know, a lot of it, again, as Neil says, there's no kind of black and white. It doesn't say you can or you can't. You've got to make a judgment call based on the information that you've got. So yeah, would you agree, Matt, Sophia?
I think that, sorry, Matt, I think there is something around if you're actually offering a service and that information is to contribute to help that service happen. So for example, in this case, a funeral can't go ahead without knowing who the grave owner is. So there's like a chain of people that I would say that's in that process that you would then deem as being able to share third-party information. I probably wouldn't share it with a member of the public. I would do it in form, you know, with your business process rather than sharing it with the public. But I think there is something around being able to share information if it's involving a service. But a lot of bigger local authorities anyway have their own compliance teams for GDPR. We certainly did when I was working at Islington, and they may have a view. So I would always check with your own compliance teams, obviously, before you do anything. But that was certainly our view. And if you've got your own privacy notices, which I think someone's put in the chat that they have, yeah, I have a privacy notice to cover us for GDPR. I think then you'd be covered.
I think adding to that as well, an obvious one would be if you've got a funeral, whether that be for ashes or a full coffin, that the family are dealing with without the services of a funeral director. I think you're going to have to, you know, that would absolutely come into play, because you're almost then otherwise saying, well, I insist you use a funeral director so we can give the information to them, which doesn't quite follow.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think somebody's asked, Brenda has asked, is this applicable for electronically held registers? I guess that means the right of inspection. Yeah, basically, however you hold your burial registers or your grave purchase registers, whether that's in the old-fashioned volumes or electronically, the public do have the right to inspect them at a date and time that is reasonable. So they can't say, I want to come at midnight on a Sunday. They can only come at a date and time that you agree with them. Or you can make a search for them. You can carry out a search for them and make copies of any of the information, and you can make a charge for that, which is why I think some local authorities still charge for carrying out searches, genealogy searches. I know some have gone on to sort of electronic systems like Deceased Online and sort of do it that way, but others I think still offer a manual service.
Stephanie just adds there, can they expect all registers? I thought it was just the burial register. No.
If you look at LOCO, which I do frequently, there is obviously provision in there for the burial registers to be inspected, but also in one of the schedules, which I should know off the top of my head, but I can't remember, I'm just going to look it up. One of the schedules also refers to the Register of Purchased Graves being open to inspection as well. So it applies basically to Register of Burials and the Register of Purchased Graves. If you bear with me, I'll tell you where it is. It is, no, it's a schedule.
Julie, your cat's pulling the face that most people pull when they get asked this question.
He's well trained. Right, so it's Schedule 2, Part 2, and then Paragraph 5, a register under Paragraph 2, which is basically a register of purchased graves, shall at all reasonable times be available for inspection by any person free of charge. So that's the bit that covers the exclusive right of burial register. and within the body of LACO itself, where it talks about the keeping a register of burials, it says something similar as well. There you go, the register of burials and record of disinterment, so you can show your exhumation register as well, shall at all reasonable times be available for consultation by any person free of charge. Free of charge is important. You can't charge people to look at them themselves. You can charge if you make a search for them, but if they come into your premises or wherever and do it themselves, you can't actually charge them for that. So I hope that's okay.
Very good. Stephanie says thank you. Awesome, appreciate that. Mushtaq, I see your question in the Q&A. We will get to that, I promise. We've not forgotten about you there, so we'll just run through the polls. Are you guys good for number 4?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Do local authorities have to provide burial or cremation facilities for their local population? Again, yes, no, or don't know.
Get Toby to do a little dance while we're waiting. Entertain everyone, folks.
Good questions this week. These are, well, I find them all tricky, but these ones are especially tricky.
We're going to test you at the end of the year. Yeah, Neil, you should have learned so much now on these webinars.
Honestly, I've learned a lot. I really have. I have, and it's surprising. But no, I only have you people to thank for that. All right, we're at the level everyone's voted. Let's have a look.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't share the results.
Interesting. So 36% say yes, 57% say no, and 6% don't know. It's interesting. So the majority of you are actually correct. The answer is no. Although local authorities are empowered to, they're not actually obliged to provide a burial facility. There's no legal requirement to do that. What they are legally required to do under Section 46 of the Public Health Control of Disease Act 1984 is to, it says requires an authority to cause a body to be buried or cremated, but it doesn't have to be premise owned by the authority. So as is the case with some cemeteries, especially in London, they actually don't have cemeteries for residents. So they've made reciprocal arrangements with other cemeteries for their residents. So as long as they can dispose of the body, they don't actually have to own their own cemetery.
So could that be, let's say any authority, any of the ones in London or anywhere else in the country, look, this is too difficult, we can't do it, we haven't got the money, for whatever reason. And there were no, you know, the next available body organisation that they could get that done with, reach an agreement with, was some distance away, and not just the neighbouring authority, but like a heck of a journey. Would that be permissible? Gosh. Yes,
it would be. Yeah, their requirement is to dispose of the body. It doesn't say it has to be within a distance. It doesn't say it has to be within the area that the resident lived in. Just the fact that the body is disposed of. Not a very nice way of putting it, but buried. Obviously, there's an issue with families, and there's that part you have to think about, because they'll be travelling to go and visit the graves, and so the authority does have some kind of, I think, some obligation to look for the best answer they can within their resources, as to accommodate families within their residents within their area.
Actually, Fiona's just raised a very good point. We're talking about England and Wales here. Yeah, Scotland has a much more recent and progressive set of legislation. And actually in Scotland, local authorities are required to provide burial grounds within the local authority. So thank you, Fiona, for sharing that. Sorry for being English and Welsh profiles and leaving Scotland out. Thank you. It's really important that we include all nations. So yeah, so in England and Wales, as Sophia says, we don't have to provide burials or burial or cremation facilities. They can, if they want to, a local authority can, but there's no actual legal requirement on anybody to do so, which is quite worrying, isn't it? It worries me.
I think if more heads of service were aware of that, there's a good argument there for it to sharpen the focus of, do you remember ring fencing money? Do you remember that? Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, you don't have to provide it. You do have to provide an allotment. You don't have to provide a burial space.
Yeah.
So would that not justify the fees and charges that we charge to an extent? And also, you know, trying to not offset anyway.
No, I agree. And I think it leaves us quite vulnerable, to be honest. Particularly, you know, if we look at what's happening at the moment, we've got cremation is becoming kind of increasingly private sector, whereas burial tends to remain with the public sector because it's not as profitable. So, you know, companies are not quite so willing to invest in burial facilities as they are cremation facilities. So it's kind of a worry that if local authorities suddenly go, well, hang on, we can't afford to provide burial, there's you know, we can't cover our costs, it's too expensive to do, then what happens? You know, I think it should be a statutory function. It should be properly planned, properly regulated, and hopefully the Law Commission are about to undertake their 14th programme of law reform, law review, and that will include a modern framework for disposing of the dead. So they're going to be taking a fundamental look at burial and cremation law, and that might be one of the things that comes out of it.
Interestingly,
you know,
Jan says Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey was formed to take the overspill from London and had its own railway line to do so, and that was the reason why. And it never quite happened, did it? They have massive amount of space, in fact, and they don't do huge amounts of burial for the amount of space that they've actually got. And Alison says, but in London, we're all running out of space. It would be tricky if we were legally obliged to provide it, because that's the other thing, is about trying to find the space that you can bury in.
But it would actually help if you were legally obliged to provide it, because you would have to. So you'd either have to find space or find ways of keeping your current cemeteries active, preferably through reuse of graves. And that is already happening in some London boroughs and outside of London as well. As burial ground fills up, you know, there aren't so many options. But if we had a proper system of reuse in place, then cemeteries could be sustainable into the future, and people could still access a local, affordable burial. So, you know, my own feeling is that it should be made a statutory function, that burial space has to be provided as part of the local plan, whether it's provided by public or private sector. You know, that doesn't really matter as long as it's planned for and available. That's my feeling anyway.
Yeah, there's. I'm sure you guys know. We've one or two of our customers down in Australia. They have reuse is a big thing there, and I'm sure you guys are familiar. And you know, there's it's very common, and after a period of years, depending on the territory, you know, that there's a whole process around, okay, it becomes available again, and it's, you know, that's how they sustain it, you know.
Yeah. So. With the annoying thing is, Neil, we've been talking about this for, I don't know, best part of 15, 20 years now, saying that, you know, we are at a crisis. We're beyond the crisis, really. We've been pushing for reuse of graves as long as I can remember, and sort of getting nowhere, really. I think it's quite a sensitive subject, and successive governments haven't been prepared to kind of take it on. I think they're fearful of what the public will say, but actually I'd be more scared of the public saying, you know, why can't I have a burial?
Yeah.
I think most people, you know, there was a survey done by Douglas Davies many years ago now, looking at public reaction to reuse, and the vast majority were in favour. And in fact, many thought we already did that. A lot of people think that after 100 years, graves are reused anyway, which they're not. But the public perception is that's what happens, and actually they're okay with that. Yeah. So, and in fact, you know, England I know again Scotland have got legislation that will allow reuse in the future, but sort of England and Wales we're the only country really in Europe that doesn't have reuse of graves. You know, if you go to Germany, you get a very limited tenure, and also if you don't look after the grave, the cemetery authority has the right to terminate your arrangement and have an exhumation, and and then you no longer have that grave. So not only can they reuse graves, but they can force people to look after them as well. So, you know, I think we could learn a lot from looking abroad.
Yeah.
Not
It's
saying
just
we should be digging people up or throwing them out, but you know, we could look at how cemeteries operate in the rest of the world and learn from that.
I think it's education as well, isn't it? It's how you educate the public rather than, you know, how you say it and explain and make people understand what the issues are, first of all, and what the solutions are. And actually it's done in a really sensitive way. So you're not actually digging people up and just leaving them to one side. And I think if you do it properly, you know, I think the overwhelming response would be positive, because actually at the end of the day, a lot of people, if they want to be buried, they want to be buried where their family members are.
Absolutely. And if you look at the City of London, where reuse has been taking place for a number of years now, they did massive consultation exercises before they started. You know, they chose the areas where they were going to have reuse of graves. They put public notices up, they engaged with the local community. And I think out of several thousand graves, they had 3 people come forward. 2 of them, once they'd had it all explained what it meant, were fine with it and went ahead. And one said they didn't want their grave to be reused, so they just didn't use that grave. They used around it. And, you know, I can't remember how many thousands of burials they've done since then. And, you know, it hasn't caused the major kind of ruptions that the press would have you believe would happen if we went down that road. So I think you're absolutely right, Sophia. It's, you know, when it's explained to people that it's done sensitively and the reasons for it, I think most people are fine.
Just when you're saying there about education as well of the public, I think it's us as well, you know. So I don't know if you remember back into 2019, I went and gave a talk about this, and I think there was probably a couple of hundred people in the room, all local authority managers, and I said, who out of the people in the room are currently investigating reusing their public consecrated graves? You know, absolutely, a very small end of the wedge here, but who's doing it? And I think of all them people, about 3 people put their hands up. And afterwards, when you're getting coffees and talking to people, it was more that people just didn't know. People didn't know you could do it.
Mm.
So I think we have a part to play as well, all of us. But
Good point.
There you go.
I think Simon has just asked the question. Simon Ferrer has asked if we can answer this one now, I think, because it's sort of pertinent.
Yeah.
So Simon's put, does every aspect of legislation pertaining to local burial authorities also relate to private cemeteries? Simple answer, Simon, is no. The Local Authorities Cemeteries Order, or LACO, only applies to local authorities in cemeteries and Wales. It doesn't apply to private burial grounds. In fact, this is one of the issues that I think the Law Commission really need to get to grips with, because there is a massive kind of gap between the public and private sector in terms of cemetery legislation. So for a lot of private cemeteries, they may be under their own Act of Parliament that will sort of give a set of regulations. But for everyone else, there's very little, really. We're still kind of looking at the burial acts of the 1860s, was it 1880s? Really ancient legislation. But no, we advise private company cemeteries to follow the spirit of LACO. But, you know, ultimately it's down to them. So I think we need it's the same with churchyards, isn't it? Churchyards have also got a separate set of laws. So you've got, you know, many different kind of sets of requirements, really. And I think we could do with one set that will cover everything and everybody.
And probably to round off this section, Liz says, would you only be considering new reuse of graves after the end of the exclusive right of burial?
Possibly, that could be one option depending on the length of the right of burial. I think our sort of the policy we came up with on reuse of graves is that where the grave hasn't been used for at least 75 years, it may be that you have to determine the right of burial. It gets quite complicated because again there's different legislation in London for some of the London boroughs and then outside of London, and also whether the ground is consecrated or unconsecrated. So I think we could probably do a whole session on reuse. Actually, it would fill a whole session, and maybe we'll do that in due course. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it depends on also. We would not recommend reuse in the cemetery unless you've got a heritage management plan in place, and your heritage management plan would identify the best either individual graves or sections for reuse. So it's not a simple yes or no, I'm afraid. It's a little bit more complex than that. But yeah, we might think about a reuse webinar actually if people would be interested. That might be a good idea.
Very good. All right, guys, good conversation. Shall we head to number 5? Let's go.
Yes, please.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this probably comes up once every few months. Can an applicant for cremation inspect the medical forms following a cremation, and can they have copies of the forms? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, or not sure.
Getting there, we're getting there. It's a great view, Julie. Right, here we go. I think that's probably it.
Okay, so don't know, pips it, followed by no, and then a small number saying yes. So the short answer is yes, they can. So I'm going to quote here from the Crem Regs. So the Crem Regs 2008 state that a cremation authority may allow anyone to inspect the register and the forms, and the cremation authority may issue a copy. So yeah, if the applicant's asking if they can see those forms, yes, but it would be reasonable as someone working in the authority to say why exactly is it that you need them. That's not being nosy. That's seeing what they're going to use it for, so that you can make a judgment call on whether you say yes or no. Because remember, just now it said may, not must. So you may give those forms over, but you need to know why. So if there's a legal challenge or something like that, or you think there's going to be some sort of needle come off the back of it, it might also be worth hopefully having a solicitor actually making a formal request for those. But yeah, if someone comes forward to you and they ask and they're the applicant and it checks out, no problem with that.
Yeah, I think that
it's like buses. That you don't hear that question for ages and ages, and you get 2 or 3 in a week. So
yeah, that bit you said, Matt, about may and must is really important. So where it says may in a piece of legislation, that's kind of enabling, but the assumption is that you would act reasonably. So you wouldn't withhold something just for the hell of it. You'd have to have a good reason for not doing something. So, you know, the law of the country is based on reasonableness. So where it says may, it enables you to do something on the expectation that you will be reasonable about it. Where it says must, then you have to do it whether you like it or not. So
or shall, I think the other one.
Or shall, yeah, absolutely. So thank you.
Boris, okay, number 6. Here we go.
Okay, so number 6, the question is, can a cremation authority ever release the ashes to somebody other than the applicant for the cremation or their nominee? So can a cremation authority release ashes other than to the applicant or somebody that they've nominated? Answer yes, no, or not sure. Place your votes now. Did you write down your guest answer there, Neil? Are you doing it as you go along?
Yeah, we actually have a question in from Mark Drummond, and he submitted it ahead of time. I was just making a note to make sure I read it out. Okay, where are we at? That's probably it. Let's close that off. There's your results.
Okie dokie. So, interesting split. So, 22% of people say yes, you can. 63% of people say no, you can't. And 15% of people say they're not sure. Interesting. The actual answer is that yes, you can. Regulation 30 of the Cremation England and Wales Regulations 2008, which covers the disposal of ashes, was amended by the Cremation England and Wales Amendment Regulations 2017, and it states, in exceptional circumstances, the cremation authority may, at their discretion, release the ashes to someone other than the applicant or the applicant's nominee. So it does give you the permission to do that in exceptional circumstances. So you wouldn't do it willy-nilly, there'd have to be good circumstances. And the Ministry of Justice actually produce guidance, and their guidance on this particular issue states, there may be times when you're contacted by a person who is neither the applicant nor their agent with a request that the ashes be returned or disposed of in ways that are contrary to the wishes of the applicant, contrary to the instructions of the applicant. You should only consider returning or disposing of the ashes other than as is instructed by the applicant in exceptional circumstances, such as where the applicant was responsible for the death of the person who was cremated, or in the case of the cremation of a child, where the applicant had abused the child or their parents. Where the applicant for cremation died before giving any instructions on what should happen to the ashes, you may consider taking instructions from the applicant's executor or the administrator of their estate. It is not expected that the option to exercise this discretion will arise very often, since a case in which there are exceptional circumstances will be very rare. We would recommend crematoria take legal advice before acting in a way that is contrary to the instructions of the applicant. So, yes, you can give the ashes out to somebody other than the applicant, but only in exceptional circumstances, and you should take the advice of your legal department before you decide to do that. But I think it was introduced because sometimes cremation authorities were stuck in a bit of a position where the applicant had died and there was no clear route for what to do with the ashes because they hadn't received an instruction before the applicant had died. So including being able to take instruction from the applicant's executor or administrator is really important. And then very occasionally there's going to be a case, where it's really quite horrendous and it may not be possible to act on the applicant's instruction. So it gives that kind of get out, but with the proviso that you should seek legal advice before doing so. I'm not sure. I wonder if anyone's actually had to do that. I don't think I ever did.
I didn't, but can I add something to that as well?
Mm.
This might not sound entirely in line with that, but I know it's happened to me a few times, and I'm imagining that this might happen a lot where we're starting to look after ashes where the applicants died during what we're coming out the other side of now. And I've had it a few times where the applicant gave their instruction to the funeral director on a signed interment form that the funeral director kept, has since died, and then the application comes in for interment of ashes after. Now, I never had any issue with that because that was their instruction prior to their death. So I can't see their executor arguing it. But I know this has come up a few times since I worked for the Institute, and it still confuses people. But it's just to throw that in as well, because it's not entirely the same as what the question that you've just posed, but it's worth knowing.
Yeah, thanks. Sophia, did you ever have to use that?
Not really. I mean, most of our cases were either applicants not collecting ashes, even though they said they were going to, and then there was a process for trying to obviously contact families to know how to dispose of them. And the danger, I suppose, for a lot of authorities is how they get lots of ashes stored in their stores for years and years, is because they're too scared to know, what to do with them. So although we write letters, some obviously authorities are more proactive than others, but the thought of just scattering someone's ashes in the garden of remembrance, which is what obviously you can do after a certain period of time, I think it frightens a lot of people, even people that work within the sector, as about the repercussion of what that might be. So I think even the whole question around ashes, even if they're collected by a funeral director and then they're sitting on the funeral director's shelf for a while, then the funeral director doesn't know what to do with them. I think it makes everyone very nervous, and actually someone has to make a decision at some point. And I think that's what the difficulty is. Because you just bet you'll scatter them and about a week later the family will come back to you. I've had that happen where we've done that, where we've scattered them, and then the family have contacted us and we've had to say, I'm sorry, we've kept the audit trail of the letters. This is where they're scattered.
Yeah, I mean, the cremation regulations do allow you to give notice to the applicant that you are going to dispose of the ashes, and you have to leave 14 days before you do so from from the date of the letter. So there is a mechanism for disposing of any unclaimed ashes, but as you say, you don't want to rush into that. You need to have done your sort of research first and try to have that dialogue with the applicant before you do anything. It's really important to have a proper system in place, isn't it? And to have an audit system so that you don't get ashes building up. And yeah, it's sorry, I was just reading that one. It's gone off my screen there. Historic ashes in my locked cupboard. No family. Can we inter them in with his wife in her unpurchased grave? My superiors have insisted we do this. How do we stand on this? Sorry, I'm not sure who that is because we haven't got a name.
I think it's Tusa. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry.
All right.
It's Tusa.
Okay. Ooh, I don't know. I'd like to know why they're in your cupboard in the first place. The best thing to do would be try and contact the person who applied for the cremation, and if they're no longer alive, whether there's anybody. Oh, Simone, thank you. Whether there's anybody who's acting. If the applicant is no longer alive, was there an executor? I think you'd need to explore all those avenues first to try and find out, what exactly has happened. How come they've ended up in your locked cupboard? Because East Suffolk, you're not a crematorium. I don't think. Is that cemetery or crematorium? You might need to find out where the ashes were cremated, and then sort of try and go down the applicant, find the applicant. So, I mean, technically, if somebody applies to bury ashes in an unpurchased grave, so that's not, that could happen. It's the fact that we're not quite sure how the ashes got to where they were and what the intention was. So, might need to do a little bit of research on that one first, Simone. Cemetery, yeah. So when you took over, those ashes were there. It might be worth having a look and seeing if there's a label from a crematorium on them, and try and make some inquiries there. But be aware that the applicant may have given instruction for them to be buried and has thought they've been buried. So it could raise, some concern. But I always find it's best to be honest, no matter how horrible the outcome. So I think, would you agree, so for Matt, to try and find the applicant, find out who applied for the cremation, and then try and approach them?
I think you've got a duty to do that first, just to see if there's any objection, really, because what you're suggesting to do, I wouldn't have any problem with it. It's just making sure that you're covered in what boxes you've ticked before you go to do it. So it's only the same as if you go into, like you just said there, if you execute that however many days before you go and scatter, it's the same setup, isn't it? You're just making sure no one's got that objection first.
Yeah, and I think if the applicant has assumed that they've been buried, then they need to know that that hasn't happened for whatever reason. So as I say, it might not be a very nice thing to have to deal with, but you know, you've got to be honest. You've got to sort of explain what's happened and why, and try and put things as right as you can.
Very good. All right, guys. Let's have a look at number 7. Get this one launched.
You're on mute, so.
Mute there.
Sorry. Right, I'll start again. What is the minimum period that paperwork relating to a burial must be retained for? Is it 15 years, indefinitely, or no limit?
I think you guys have got another little trick going on here. Some semantics around indefinitely and no limit.
Excellent.
Little things, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, where are we at? Maybe one more coming in. Okay, so here are what you said.
Okay, interesting. So it's quite evenly split actually. So 30% say 15 years, 39% say indefinitely, and 32 say no limit. That's almost, yeah, interesting. So the actual answer is there is no limit. So I think the cremation regulations have something about the length of time you should keep cremation records, but the local authority cemeteries order just requires a burial authority to keep plans, statutory plans, registers and records, and you must store them to prevent them from loss or damage. It doesn't actually state anything about burial interment forms or burial anything other than the registers and the plans that's listed in LACO. Everything else it doesn't actually mention. So whereas the CREM regs do give a time frame. And that question gets asked quite a bit because there's a bit of confusion between CREM papers and burial records. But what I would say is that if you can scan those, if you've got good quality scans, because everyone's trying to go obviously paperless and storage facilities, then I would advise people to scan them, keep the records, and then you could get rid of the originals. But you can't get rid of the items that are listed in LACO, which are your registers, in your plans and your records. You're required to keep them indefinitely. If that makes sense, hopefully.
Absolutely. You guys have anything to add?
No, I think just we do get asked that quite a lot, to be honest. I think there is a lot of confusion, particularly where the burial authority is also a cremation authority, where there is strict sort of timeframes on keeping cremation paperwork. But yeah, it's quite surprising that there is no, apart from the registers, there's no limit on keeping burial paperwork. So I know, you know, I've been to some authorities where the paperwork dates back to year dot, basically, which is fascinating. Absolutely, you know, some amazing sort of bits of information on there. And you know, as a kind of lover of the past and being an archaeologist and everything, I find that really interesting. But practically, whether that can continue, because obviously space is an issue. So yeah.
Very good. Okay, there's just a quick note in there. Just say a quick hello to Reese. He's a as he says, he's a new customer of ours, and thank you, Reese, for joining. You're a gentleman. I think you dealt with my colleague David through your process. So he spoke very highly of you, and hello all the way from here in the UK and Ireland to yourself in Canada. It's great to have you join us. So thank you very much.
Hi, Reese.
Neil, can I suggest that we're getting quite close to the end, and there's a couple of questions we haven't answered. So rather than go on to the next one, we might leave the next couple for the next time we do this, and we'll answer the questions that have come in and any others that anyone's got urgently. Is that okay?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You guys take it away. First up is Mushtaq. So Mushtaq says if ASHI's instructions are returned to applicant and applicant can't collect it, will we sort? Then we can't collect it. What sort of consent documents are acceptable, i.e., letter or email?
So if ASHI's instructions are returned to applicant and applicant can't collect it. Okay. If the applicant wants to change their instruction, they would need to give you that in writing. So if they can't collect it, they can nominate somebody to collect it for them. So you would need written consent from the applicant to say that X can collect the ashes on their behalf, whether that's a funeral director or if it's a friend of theirs or somebody else who's acting on their behalf. They can nominate that person. Then the person who's collecting is advised to bring ID with them. So if you're expecting John Smith, for example, you'd want to see some ID that confirms that it is John Smith, like a driving license or passport or something like that. If the applicant temporarily can't collect them, they can give you an instruction to hold the ashes until it's safe for them or they're able to come and collect them. So it may be that the change of instruction is to hold temporarily, pending collection at a later date. So then you can hold them at the crematorium. I think that's anything to add.
There's a follow-up there that says, does that include email?
Only if
I know what I think about it, but
I think my feeling is that only if you're very sure that it's a secure email is coming from the applicant. I probably would rather have it in writing from the applicant, even if it's a scanned document that they send and everything matches up. So I'm very wary of email addresses like Fluffy Bunny 96, because that doesn't really give you any clues. I mean, I know that's Neil's address. Sorry to use that, Neil, but I think where you've got a dialogue with someone, then again you can make that judgment. But I'd be very wary of taking an email instruction that you can't prove the provenance of.
Okay, very good. Richard Barker has one. Hello to Richard. So he says, for scanned documents, do we need to keep do we need to keep for any period of time?
If it's burial records, burial paperwork, no. If it's cremation paperwork, you have to keep them for 15 years. You used to have to also keep the original of the scanned documents for cremation paperwork. You used to have to keep those for 2 years once you'd scanned them, and then keep the scans for 15 years. But actually, you no longer have to keep the originals. Once you've scanned them, they can now be disposed of. So that 2 year is gone. You don't need that anymore, which I think again confuses quite a lot of people.
I'd also be a little bit wary about pressing delete on your burial records anytime soon, though. Just think, I mean, how many times we had someone come forward and said, something isn't entirely right in some of the paperwork that you've received. It might sound really obvious that, but I've had probably 2 conversations about that this week with someone that is absolutely desperate to free up their space on their hard drive. But I think they might regret it. So if you had at least a nominal period where you kept them, that might be an idea.
I think a lot of the queries we deal with as well, they're so historic, and people go back for so long that it's always handy to have. Though you may not use them on a day-to-day basis, it has helped with some of the queries, certainly that I've dealt with, trying to locate information, which would otherwise be lost if they'd been destroyed. So I'm the same. Maybe I'm a bit old school, but I'd like to keep everything.
If nothing else, I'm thinking specifically about where a grave is purchased at the time. It's a purchase at the time that the first burial goes in as well, and by default the applicant becomes the grave owner. That in itself is the important bit for me. That's where most of the problems seem to come from.
I see somebody's asked, when did that go? I'm assuming the 2 year thing. That went in the Cremation England Wales Amendment Regulations 2016. So 4 or 5 years ago now. So if you've been keeping them for 2 years, all that time, you don't need to anymore. To free up some office space.
Okay, so there's a couple from Sheena, then we've got Beverly, so we'll do Sheena's 3 on the go here. So is there any indication from the government that will increase funeral numbers before 21st of June? Scotland increased to 50 already, she says, and then any news on the CREM 5 return, please?
Okay, shall I take this?
Yeah.
Okay, possibly on the numbers. You're quite right. Scotland increased to a maximum of 50, or the maximum the venue will accept this week. Wales and Northern Ireland are also based on the maximum capacity of the venue. Currently in England, the maximum attendance at a funeral is still 30. There is growing pressure to review this. I think there's been quite a lot in the press, and the Daily Mail in particular seem to be launching a bit of a campaign, basically saying, how can you have 4,000 people at a football match or whatever it was, and only 30 at a funeral? You know, and a funeral is an important life event, whereas a football match, to some people, is more than an important life event. Not to me, only when Arsenal are playing. But you know, there is growing concern that funeral numbers should be increased. I think one of the concerns that we have, along with our sort of fellow organisations, is that at the moment it's 30, and then from June, whatever the date in June is, it's unlimited. And we worry that a lot of people are going to sort of think, well, I'm not going to have a funeral in early June because I can only have 30 people. And then suddenly after June the 27th, we can have as many people as we like. So we're going to hold off having the funeral. So I think there is an argument for gradually kind of increasing the numbers. And I think our preference would be to make it based on venue capacity rather than put a figure on the actual number. But again, that has its own problems, because I think in some cases people are travelling to a crematorium where they can have more mourners. So if you've only got a small chapel, people may decide to travel 20 miles to an alternative crematorium where they can have more people. So there isn't an easy answer, is there really? I suppose the easy answer is, let's get rid of social distancing when it's safe to do so, and then we can open up the sort of full capacity.
Yeah.
And Form 5, we can only hope that it doesn't make a reappearance. At the moment, nobody's talking about it making a reappearance. And I think the government are working on legislation to allow the continuation of Form 4 only, certainly for the short term. So let's hope, because it's been a lot easier, hasn't it?
Very good. All right, so we're just over time. Beverly does ask perhaps maybe an article in the next newsletter on the topic of, finding scattered ashes and so on in a garden, or or in a grave or a garden of remembrance. So Matt has kindly messaged me, and he says he has agreed to do an article on that. So Beverly, that will be coming out in due course. So thank you to Matt for doing it.
Did you answer Mark Drummond's one?
Oh, there's me writing Mark's name down. Sorry, Mark. Thank you. Yes, we'll just do that we'll just hop over here to another screen. So Mark wrote in ahead of time, he couldn't make it today. So he says, I have a question for the Q&A. He said, material removed from a cremator flue or scraped from the hearth. Our new hearth gets more build-up of body salts. What is the legal definition of these materials? We have buried in the past, but the quantities in the new hearth type produces will cause us problems in the future. So that's around the material that's...
Really
sorry, Neil, we're really struggling to hear you. It's very quiet.
Sorry. Any better now or not? No better?
Not really.
No? Gosh, I'm not sure what's going on.
No. Do you want to email us Mark's question?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you. Sorry, Mark, if you're there, we'll provide an email response.
Heard that all right?
I don't know who that was.
I've just popped that into the chat there, guys. That's from Mark. Don't know if you can still hear me or not. But...
All right. I'm not sure there is a legal definition. Matt, do you want to?
Yeah, there isn't a legal definition, but I mean, just give it another go. If it was me, I'd be expecting the people that are doing that, so I imagine FT or someone similar, to dispose of that themselves, if I'm totally honest with you. It's a lot different to, you know, I get asked a question a lot if you've got, I really don't like the term fly ash, but that's just me, because it's ash, and where people sort of pull that together and then either bury it or it goes up a hoover. I don't like any of that. That should be either cremulated and scattered on your gardens of remembrance, or dealt with at the time that you're actually cremating that person. Shouldn't really be any sort of grey area around that. But something like this, if it was your secondary chamber that was being pulled out, generally all that's going to go with, well, you'll have it skipped, and then it should be picked up by someone that can demonstrate that they're going to do it in an environmentally friendly way. So I would stick to that personally, because the body salts. I mean, if Mark wants to send us a picture of exactly what he's on about, because I might, in my head, I'm thinking a small amount of residue that isn't actually definable as a person. That's how I'm reckoning it up, which means that it should be treated in a different way. But either way, still, it's like your reagent. You want an environmentally, you know, a firm that checks out, that's going to give you a cheat sheet at the end saying, we're looking after it, rather than fly tipping it. That's what it really boils down to. So I don't know what anyone else thinks, but that's my view. Demonstrating that it's taken off site and dealt with, because I do agree that if you're burying that, you know, God knows what you're burying.
Yeah, I mean, there is a statutory definition now for what ashes are. That was introduced in the amendment regulations in 2016, and that is, ashes means all the material left in the cremator after a cremation and following removal of any metal and any subsequent grinding or other process which is applied to the material. So there shouldn't really be anything on the hearth, because you should recover everything that, you know, from a cremation. Everything should be recovered. But as Matt said, if you want to send us some pictures or some further information, Mark, we will have a look for you. It's one of those things that's not really spoken about, isn't it? I think, and
yeah,
the sort of residue from flues, particularly.
I mean, if it's salt encased in brick, there's nothing you're going to be able to do with that. You can't send that through your cremulator or anything otherwise. I also wouldn't have thought burying it was the best thing you could possibly do. So there's got to be a mechanism there. I mean, if they speak directly to the manufacturer as well, they should be well versed in what they're pulling out of these machines. You know, the engineers, you know, the ones I've dealt with, they're all fine. They'll tell you what's happening to it. So if they can then follow that up with demonstrating where it's going, you should be covered.
It'll be covered under the waste regulations, won't it? Yeah. I think what Mark's getting at is it human? Are there human elements of human remains in there? Which, you know, unless we did a forensic analysis, I don't think we'd know exactly what it's made of. So I think obviously the cremated remains are the important thing, so they have to be recovered in full. Anything else sort of outside of that, I think has to be, as Matt says, has to be dealt with in cooperation with the people doing the servicing or the rebuilding.
Just to draw a very quick comparison, because I'm conscious of the time. If you've got, there was a period where breast implants seemed to cause you a bit of trouble on the hearth. So if we take that into consideration, it could be argued that when the hearth is completely pulled out and then relined, there's a certain element of that as well. So if you take the same logic with that, your hearth goes, doesn't it? And that's going to be treated in a sensitive way as well. So there are precedents really that are set here. But yeah, just something that came to mind then.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, It's been very, very good. Again, these are always, like I said at the start, these are always popular. Really good conversation today, as ever, and questions are really good. Very difficult this week, guys. You're very mean to your panelists, your audience, should I say? But thoroughly enjoyed it, and look forward to the next one. Any final words, guys?
Thank you for attending. It means a lot to us that you take time out of your busy days to join us, and we always find it a learning experience as well. So thank you for contributing, and thanks Neil for hosting us as always, and your team at Clockbox.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks everybody, and we're just sharing some of the questions we get asked by members on a day-to-day basis. So these things are, they come up all the time, so it just benefits the room, we hope, just putting these out there for others to listen to and get the answers for. But thanks everyone.
One last one from me is that I hope everyone's getting on okay, because everyone that I'm speaking to this week, we're starting to sound a bit tired and a bit done with all of this. So I hope everyone is genuinely all right. Yeah,
and that's a good reminder. On our website, we have got a wellbeing page. There's resources there if anybody's feeling a bit jaded and needs some support. We've still got a deal in place with Heart-Led Wellbeing, where ICCM members can receive a discount if they need any extra support. So you can check out our wellbeing page on our website. It's in the latest post towards the bottom under the webinars bit, actually. So if anyone is struggling and needs some support, it's there for you. So stay safe.
Yep.
All right, folks, thank you. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks for your time. Everybody else, have a great week, bank holiday weekend. Stay well. See you in 2 weeks' time.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.